In this section, we want to get into KPIs for global purchasing, but specific to suppliers. Things that we can use to measure all of our suppliers, but on an individual basis. The suite of supplier-specific KPIs for purchasing should include categories of items produced. We talked briefly in a previous section about product categories for an importer being wearing apparel, footwear, accessories. We want to have KPIs around individual categories within each vendor from whom we buy these products. A list of items produced, that's not necessarily a KPI, but a good tool to have, because as our vendor base expands or contracts, we need to know who's making what and be able to tie other KPIs, item-specific KPIs, into that original list. Another KPI during a given period, existing products added to vendor portfolio. That just means existing products that we import, but that are being bought from other existing vendors. We're changing the concentration of our purchases amongst vendors. We have to measure that too, to know who's making what and in what quantities. KPIs also, new products manufactured by a vendor. That's a really important one, as new product introductions are pretty critical to the long-term viability of any importer. Who's making what of existing products, but also who's making what of new products. If we have 100 new products coming out in a year, how are those 100 new products spread across the 10 vendors that we worked with? Naturally, last one, total spend by vendor. We saw that in our example, the spend analysis real-world example, some time back. We need that too. Reminiscent of that real-world example, supplier spend as a percentage of total expenditures, that individual and cumulative approach. Total POs placed on a vendor in a month, in a quarter, in a year. Are they up? Are they down from last year? Are we doing more business with a vendor or less? Are we doing the same amount or less dollar business with a vendor, but our PO count is way up? That would indicate that we are indeed issuing more POs, but the average dollar value of those POs is down. That might be fine. We just need to know why. We need a KPI to channel us in the right direction. Number of POs not accepted by vendor. We talked about this previously. The total number of POs that were actually shipped, that were actually moved, and defective items by the number of items and the value, and which items were they. Once again, these are supplier-specific metrics. We talked about some of these already. This is supplier-specific metrics that we have to capture as well on an individual basis. Adding on to our supplier-specific metrics, some of which were discussed previously, some of which might overlap with different areas, like logistics, for example. But as we often like to say, better to have overlap, better to do it twice than to not do it at all. Specific to a vendor, how many complete POs did they ship in a month, in a quarter, in a year? Conversely, invert that KPI, how many incomplete POs did they send? Where, for example, we ordered 10,000 of a given item and they only shipped 8,000. Or we ordered 10 items and they only shipped 7. That's what we mean by incomplete POs. As a number and a percentage of the total, we can use that KPI, incomplete POs, on a vendor-specific basis to dig deeper, especially if they have a problem with incomplete POs, or if they're doing a great job on not having incomplete POs, how can we take a best practice from them and apply it to a different vendor in a non-proprietary way? As we said previously, KPIs aren't intended to punish. They can be good, they can be not so good. They're always intended to channel behavior in a desired way. Another vendor-specific KPI, drifting into that logistics environment, that overlap that we said was okay. On-time delivery. Did they ship the order complete? Was it free of defects? Were there no damaged goods? And did it show up on time? There are 4 KPIs right in a row that we can implement with specific vendors. Inverting that KPI, let's look at late deliveries. As a number, as well as a percentage of the total. Continuing to move into that logistics environment, the number of container bookings placed by a vendor on a freight forwarder or a steamship line. This type of KPI allows for a transition into that freight forwarder 3PL world where vendor and 3PL have to collaborate together. This KPI is very helpful in determining how those vendors are working with 3PLs or steamship lines, depending on who they're making the booking with. Let's roll out a real-world example, some must-have metrics for overseas suppliers. We just rattled off 4 in a row. Let's do it a little bit more formally. In an earlier real-world example, a supplier spend analysis was created for an Ohio-based importer of costume jewelry. You will recall that we used a Pareto analysis to identify where the company's purchasing dollars were going per vendor, along with a cumulative representation of the total money spent. Although this is a good place to start in terms of building a suite of supplier KPIs, there is more work to be done. What must-have KPIs can we suggest to this importer to create a solid KPI suite? We're coming back to an existing example to illustrate the importance of those financial and accounting KPIs, but how we have to use them to build additional KPIs, but also use those financial and accounting KPIs as a symptom of a problem or an illustration of something good that's happening, and looking a little bit deeper to find the root cause of why things are going well or why things are not going well. Second paragraph. In the spirit of categorizing KPIs for vendors, it might be a good idea for the importer to break things down into categories such as PO management, product quality, documentation, and logistics performance. Within this holistic framework, we can suggest some basic KPIs for the Ohio importer to use. At a bare minimum, the costume jewelry importer should use operational KPIs that include, by vendor, total number POs issued, total accepted, number of perfect orders. These are KPIs we talked about before. POs canceled or changed, incomplete orders, late deliveries, missed booking window, shipments missing documentation, which is one we haven't talked about. We'll come back to that in the future. Missed sailings, defective products, and damaged merchandise. While there are many other KPIs that can be used, the above represents a solid base from which to build. The theme here was to take those initial financial KPIs, the supplier spend analysis that we did previously, use them as standalone KPIs, but also build others from an operational perspective, product quality perspective, but use them all to not only channel behavior in a desired direction, but to uncover opportunities for continued good performance or the eradication of not so good performance. That's what a holistic approach to KPIs does. And this is especially true in a purchasing environment. Couple more supplier-specific metrics. Admittedly, floating more into that logistics side of things, but that has a definite impact on the purchasing function. Bookings that are made within the allowed time frame. Usually, unless it's peak season, an industry standard is to give a vendor 15 days from the sailing date to place an electronic booking with a freight forwarder or a steamship line. How about bookings outside of the allowed time frame? Number and percentage of total. Any good freight forwarder with decent systems, especially that allow for electronic bookings, can provide this information. How many bookings do we have outside the 15-day window, which in turn cause bookings to be rejected by a steamship line because they receive them too late and they don't have enough room on their ships, which causes delivery delays, which causes customers to be upset, who sometimes cancel orders. We can see this ripple effect of following KPIs across the supply chain and how they become so valuable. Shipments with complete documentation set. We just mentioned this in our last real-world example. Goods aren't going anywhere without the hard copy documentation, or at least the soft copy content of that documentation being available. It's simple as that. Containers get rejected or left behind all the time because there's no commercial invoice, no packing list. Vendor-related stuff we have to measure as a KPI, shipments with complete documents. Conversely, we need to measure shipments without complete documentation and look how we can fix that. And finally, on this slide, the total number of containers shipped in a period. Why would we want to do that in purchasing? Because it's purchase orders and the items related to purchase orders that go inside these containers. Last slide in this section. Total less than container load shipments, LCL. The most economic way to ship ocean freight is full container. There might be a very good reason why a particular vendor is shipping goods LCL. It might also be that they're shipping LCL because their production runs are fragmented and they're shipping as goods come off the line. If it is our policy as an importer to use LCL cargo, that's fine. If it isn't, we need to know on a vendor-specific level why it's happening. Rolled containers. That's a term from the ocean freight world where bookings are accepted, but containers aren't shipped. Maybe it's related to the vendor. Maybe it's related to purchasing activities. Maybe it isn't. We need to measure it and find out. Any missed sailings. We missed a sailing because the purchasing department placed an order too late on a vendor. The vendor missed a sailing because they didn't have the documentation. There's a variety of reasons why sailings are missed, why containers don't get on a booked ship. We need to measure that and understand why. We mentioned this a bunch of times. Number of air freight shipments and the reason behind it, especially if our deal is to ship via ocean freight. And then the dollar value of those air freight shipments. That's all we have for that section. Upon our return, we're going to start rounding out KPIs for global purchasing and talk about human capital, the development of our own people within purchasing. And then we'll have another section on corporate social responsibility. And that will wrap up the overall subject of KPIs for global purchasing.